It was supposed to be an easy week. I'd agreed to house sit for my aunt and uncle while they were on a trip. Their house was a large, three-story place on the outskirts of town, nestled among dense woods. It had been in the family for generations, and while it had its quirks, I'd always loved visiting as a kid. But staying there alone at night was a different story. My first day went smoothly. I unpacked, explored the house, and checked that everything was in order. By evening, I was feeling relaxed. I made myself some dinner and settled into the living room to watch TV. Outside, the trees cast long shadows across the yard, dancing with the wind, but inside, I felt safe. Or at least I did until I heard the noise. It was faint at first, just a soft, repetitive tapping sound. I muted the TV, listening carefully, trying to pinpoint the direction. It seemed to be coming from above me, maybe something rattling in the attic. I chalked it up to a loose pipe or a branch brushing against the roof and tried to ignore it. But then, it started again. This time, it was louder, like something heavy being dragged across the attic floor. My stomach twisted as the noise continued, a slow, deliberate scraping that sent shivers down my spine. I shook it off, trying to stay logical. Old houses make strange noises, right? That's all it was. I went upstairs, stopping outside the attic door, which was locked with an old-fashioned latch. I jiggled the handle to reassure myself it was secure. Satisfied, I turned to go back downstairs. As I walked away, I could have sworn I heard something breathing. I froze, heart pounding. It was faint, like a soft exhale just on the other side of the attic door. I took a step back, staring at the door, willing myself to move closer. But when I pressed my ear against the wood, the house fell silent again. Just my imagination, I whispered, trying to convince myself. I headed back downstairs, flipping on every light I could. By bedtime, I felt exhausted but uneasy. I decided to leave my bedroom door cracked, with the hall light on just in case. I drifted off eventually, but my sleep was restless, filled with odd, fragmented dreams of shadows moving in the attic, whispering voices I couldn't understand. The next morning, I woke up groggy, with a vague sense of unease. The day passed quietly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to distract myself with movies and cleaning, but every so often, I'd catch myself glancing up at the ceiling, half expecting to hear that dragging sound again. And that night, just as I was about to fall asleep, it started up again. The scraping sound. Only this time it was closer. I sat up, heart pounding, listening. The noise was more distinct now, moving slowly across the attic floor, almost as if someone were crawling up there. The air in my room felt heavy, pressing down on me, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead. I clutched my phone, debating whether to call someone, anyone, but I felt ridiculous. What would I say? That I was hearing things in the attic? Instead, I got out of bed, determined to prove to myself there was nothing there. I tiptoed to the hallway, staring at the closed attic door. The sound continued, soft but persistent. With every step closer, the air grew colder, and my hands began to shake. Just as I reached the door, the noise stopped. I stood there, frozen, every instinct telling me to run. But I reached out anyway, my hand trembling as I touched the door handle. It felt icy, almost as if it had been sitting in the cold for hours. I held my breath and listened. And then, from the other side of the door, I heard a voice. It was a whisper, so faint I could barely make it out. But I heard it. My name, repeated over and over, soft and slow. I stumbled back, barely stifling a scream. I turned and ran, bolting down the stairs, not stopping until I was back in the living room with every light on. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, clutching a blanket, staring up at the ceiling, terrified of what I'd hear if the noise started again. The house remained quiet, but the fear gnawed at me, an unrelenting, creeping dread. The next day, I tried to leave, but the house seemed different. Every time I went to the door, something stopped me. I'd forgotten my keys, or maybe I'd just wait until the afternoon, just in case someone called. I found myself wandering the rooms, glancing at the attic door, almost drawn to it. I felt like I was losing my mind, but I couldn't leave. That night, the whispering came again. I lay in bed, paralyzed, listening to the faint voice calling my name from the attic. The voice was calm, almost soothing, but it chilled me to the core. It was trying to draw me closer. I could feel it. My body was tense, every muscle rigid, fighting the urge to move. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, like they were pressing into my mind, urging me to come upstairs. I couldn't take it anymore. I leapt out of bed and threw open the attic door, my heart racing. I felt a strange compulsion to go up, to see what was waiting for me. The attic stairs creaked as I climbed, the air thick and cold. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't my name anymore. It was a question, repeated over and over. Do you remember? I didn't understand, but it filled me with an overwhelming sense of dread. My hand shook as I reached the top of the stairs. The attic was pitch black, but I could see a faint figure standing in the center, its back to me. It was tall and thin, with shoulders hunched, like it had been waiting for a long time. The whispering continued, filling the room, the words echoing in my mind. I tried to back away, but my body wouldn't listen. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face I can barely describe. Hollow, dark eyes, a twisted smile that looked stretched beyond human possibility. It looked at me, and for a brief, horrifying moment, I felt like I knew it, like it had been a part of me, something buried deep in my past. The thing took a step toward me, its arms reaching out, its fingers long and skeletal, beckoning me closer. I stumbled back, finally breaking free of the trance. I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping in my haste, and slammed the attic door behind me. I didn't stop running until I was outside, in the freezing night air. I didn't look back, didn't try to understand. I just ran, not stopping until I was far from the house, my heart pounding, the whispers still echoing in my mind. I never went back. When my aunt and uncle returned, I couldn't bring myself to tell them what I'd seen. But to this day, I feel like a part of me stayed in that attic. Like whatever was up there knew me, knew a part of me I'd forgotten. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear that same whisper, asking that same question, "Do you remember?" It all started with a strange note on my front door. I had just come home from work, a long, exhausting Friday at the office, looking forward to collapsing on the couch, ordering some takeout, and catching up on the latest true crime series. But as I approached my front door, there it was, a small, neatly folded piece of paper, taped to the door handle. "I miss you," it read. I froze, clutching my keys, heart pounding. At first, I thought it might be a prank, a bad one, but still just a prank. The handwriting was scrawled and jagged, something about it uneasy, though I couldn't say exactly why. Felt angry. Something just seemed off. I glanced around. No one was in sight. I shrugged it off, crumpled the paper, stuffed it in my pocket, and unlocked the door. Once inside, I double-checked the lock, feeling a chill creeping down my spine. I told myself it was nothing, just a mistake. But when I got inside, I realized something else. My entire living room was rearranged. The couch was pushed against the opposite wall. The coffee table was shifted diagonally, and the bookshelf near the window, with my books and a few old photos, was turned to face the wall. My mind raced. Was I imagining things? Had I somehow done this in the morning, rushing to get ready, and simply forgotten? But that didn't make any sense. Who would rearrange their living room at 7 in the morning? I walked through each room of the house, checking if anything else had been touched. The bedroom was fine. The kitchen was exactly as I'd left it. Even the attic door, which I always kept closed, was shut tight. I tried to settle down, ordered takeout, put on a movie, and attempted to ignore the cold feeling prickling at my neck. But as I was about to start eating, I noticed another note on the dining table, in the same jagged handwriting. "I'm watching you." My skin crawled. I checked the doors and windows, made sure they were locked, opened every closet, checked under the bed, scanned every corner of the house. There was no one there, no sign of anyone having been there. I spent the night on the couch, unable to sleep, every creak making me jump, the silence amplifying every sound as if the house itself was breathing, watching me. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted off, only to wake up feeling like someone was standing right beside me. I turned the lights on, but of course no one was there. I told myself it was just a nightmare and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I found another note on my bathroom mirror. "I know what you did." I stared at it, my mind blank, a sick feeling pooling in my stomach. I hadn't done anything, at least nothing that would warrant this. Who would go this far to play a prank on me? Then I noticed my toothbrush on the floor, bristles bent and smeared with something dark. I tossed it into the trash, bile rising in my throat. I told myself I'd be fine, but I knew I couldn't stay in the house alone another night. By evening, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. I packed a bag, planning to stay with my friend Ethan until I figured things out. But just as I was about to leave, the power cut out, plunging the house into darkness. I stood there, the silence oppressive, only my phone's light illuminating the space. Then, somewhere in the dark, I heard a floorboard creak. I swallowed hard, inching toward the door, gripping my phone as I saw a shadow moving in the hallway, creeping closer, deliberate, as if it knew exactly where I was. My hands shook as I fumbled to dial 911, unable to see the screen clearly. The shadow stopped, just a few feet away, and I held my breath, every nerve screaming to run. It stepped into the dim light, just enough for me to recognize the eyes, familiar, yet twisted. It was my face, only wrong, like a cracked mirror reflection. It leaned closer, whispering in my own voice, only colder, more sinister. "I miss you." I don't remember what happened next. I woke up on my front lawn, my bag beside me, the morning sun rising. I stumbled back inside, but everything was normal. The notes were gone, the furniture back in place, the house still and empty as it had always been. I moved out that day, left everything behind. My clothes, my books, even the photos. I couldn't stay. I couldn't be alone with whatever had decided to wear my face. And sometimes, lying awake at night, I still hear its whisper echoing in my head, like a bad memory I can't shake. "I miss you." Growing up, I'd always heard stories about haunted houses, the crumbling Victorian across the street, the abandoned mansion on the edge of town. But I never thought my own home, a small, ordinary two-story, could be the setting for a nightmare. And yet, here I am, recounting the story of the week I spent alone in that house, a week that changed me, probably forever. It began on a chilly, gray Sunday evening. My parents had left for a week-long cruise, their first vacation alone since I'd left for college. I was house-sitting for them, figuring I'd enjoy a bit of solitude. It sounded perfect, Just me, the quiet house, and some time to unwind. But from the first night, something didn't feel right. I was unpacking upstairs when I thought I heard something downstairs. A soft, distant creak. I froze, holding my breath, ears straining to hear more. Nothing. I shook it off as the old house settling and went back to unpacking. Later, while watching TV, I felt that strange sense of being watched, my skin prickling as I glanced around the empty room. I reminded myself the house was empty. I left the hallway light on as I went to bed, locking my bedroom door and keeping my phone nearby. As I drifted off, I thought I heard faint rustling on the other side of my bedroom door, but it stopped, and eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I found the hallway light off. I was sure I'd left it on, but I brushed it off and went about my day. I was halfway through making dinner when I noticed something odd. A small, dirty handprint on the kitchen counter, too small to be mine. I stood there, staring, my stomach turning with a cold dread, but I tried to laugh it off, convincing myself it was just an old stain. Later, the handprint was gone, which made my skin crawl. That night, I heard faint sounds again, the rustling, followed by soft footsteps. I lay there, wide awake, heart pounding, listening. Tuesday morning, I woke groggy and exhausted. In the bathroom, I froze when I saw two words written in the condensation on the mirror. Get out. I wiped it clean, hoping to erase the fear gnawing at me. I couldn't reach my parents, who were still on the cruise, and I told myself I was overreacting. That night, I locked my bedroom door again, but a loud bang jolted me awake, followed by another bang, closer, and then a low, muffled whisper. It sounded like a child's voice, softly calling my name. My blood ran cold as I sat there, eyes on the door, praying it wouldn't open. The whispers continued, soft and persistent, until suddenly, they stopped. The silence was worse. I sat wide-eyed until dawn, too afraid to move, until exhaustion took over and I fell asleep sitting up. The next day, I knew I had to leave. As I reached the front door, I froze, seeing a pair of small, muddy footprints leading up the stairs toward my bedroom. I grabbed my phone and called my friend Ethan, begging him to come over. I didn't tell him everything, but he agreed to stay the night. We tried to laugh it off, but that night, around 2 a.m., we heard the shuffling footsteps again, and the whispers, calling my name like a twisted lullaby. Ethan and I sat in silence, holding our breath until the whispers stopped. At dawn, we left the house. I didn't go back for weeks. My parents returned from their trip, and when I tried to tell them, they laughed it off. But I knew what I'd seen and heard. Even now, months later, I sometimes wake up with that voice in my head, soft and cold. And every now and then, when I visit, I'll see a faint handprint on the kitchen counter or hear the soft creak of footsteps upstairs. I know whatever was there, it's still waiting. I didn't think anything of house-sitting when my friend Mia asked me to cover for her, as she'd been offered a last-minute trip to Europe. She needed someone to stay at her place, feed her cat, and water her plants. I'd house-sat before, so I agreed, figuring it would be an easy gig. Her place was a little out of town, tucked into a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't big but had a strange layout with narrow hallways and odd corners that made the rooms feel like they folded in on themselves. I'd been there a few times during the day, but staying at night felt different. I arrived in the early evening, just as the sun was setting. The house felt silent, like it was holding its breath. I brushed off the unsettling feeling, assuming I was just tired from the drive. That first night was quiet. I had dinner, watched TV, and went to bed. Shadow, her black cat with piercing green eyes, curled up at my feet, staring as if trying to tell me something. I fell asleep easily but woke up around 3 a.m., confused, hearing faint noises downstairs, like someone moving slowly in the kitchen. My heart pounded, but I told myself it was just the house settling or the cat. The sound persisted, shifting from the kitchen to the living room, like footsteps. I forced myself to check, grabbing a flashlight and searching each room, but found nothing. I brushed it off, but the following night, I woke up again, this time to a soft, rhythmic tapping from above. I hadn't known Mia had an attic, and a chill ran down my spine as I realized the sound came from there. I stayed frozen in bed, clutching the covers, until the noise faded. The next day, I casually asked Mia if there was anything unusual about the house. After a pause, she replied seriously that there was no attic. Dread washed over me. That evening, I stayed up, trying to read but constantly distracted. Around midnight, the tapping returned, louder this time, leading me to a small, nearly hidden door in the ceiling of the narrow hallway. Heart pounding, I reached up and pulled the door open. A foul, decayed smell hit me, and when I shone my flashlight, I saw something moving in the shadows. A figure, skeletal and twisted, crouching in the corner with pale skin stretched over bones, staring at me with wide eyes and a crooked smile that revealed sharp, yellowed teeth. It whispered, "I've been waiting." Terror gripped me as I stumbled back, slamming the door and bolting to the living room, Shadow hissing as if he too sensed it. I grabbed my things and fled, spending the night in my car, too shaken to return. In the morning, I tried to explain to Mia, but she thought I was overreacting. Still, I knew what I saw, and sometimes, even now, I hear that tapping in my mind, followed by that whisper, "I've been waiting." It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend while my parents were away visiting relatives, leaving me in charge of our old 1920s house, a place with creaky floors and narrow hallways that seemed to whisper secrets. I enjoyed the solitude, staying up late and playing video games. On the first night, while scrolling through my phone, I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping from the wall next to me. It didn't sound like random house noises, it felt deliberate. I froze, then pressed my ear to the wall. The tapping stopped. I brushed it off, chalking it up to my imagination. But that night, around 2 a.m., the sound returned, louder and right by my bed. This time it was scratching, sharp and deliberate, as if claws were dragging down the inside of the wall. My heart pounded as a whisper drifted through the wall, saying, "Let me in." Stumbling back in shock, I spent the rest of the night locked in the living room. The next day, feeling watched and desperate, I called my friend Tom, who came over and tried to dismiss my fear. But then he heard it too, a faint tapping and a low, guttural growl from inside the wall. We bolted down the stairs, but as we reached the door, we heard a door creak open inside the house and a voice calling, "Let me in." Terrified, we left the house and never went back. I stayed with Tom for a few days, unable to shake the sense that something was still waiting in the walls. When my parents called, I couldn't bring myself to tell them what I'd heard. I don't know if it's still there, waiting for the next person to stay alone in that house. But I do know one thing. Some houses are better left empty, and sometimes it's best not to listen when something in the walls whispers, "Let me in."